Hello and welcome to the Tifo Football Podcast. I'm Joe Devine and I'm now joined by Alex Stewart.
Good morning, Joe Devine.
Good morning, and Seb Stafford-Bloor.
Hello, Joe.
Hello. Today we have a bumper show. That's what people say, isn't it? A bumper show full of bumpers. And one of them is Jack Pitt-Brooke from The Athletic. So Jack joins us at the very beginning to chat for 10 minutes about the situation with Kieran Trippier and the betting-related football ban and fine. Very interesting, unusual situation, although apparently not as unusual as I imagined that it would be. So Jack explains all of that and why it's such a complex issue, where the line of culpability is. And then for the main thrust of the episode, we are talking again about sensible transfers. We have another list of players here, some of them huge, some of them merely interesting, who we're going to discuss. So hopefully you'll all enjoy that and stick around for it. But before we begin, Seb, did you know that if you want to read high-quality pieces about football, or indeed many other sports, you can do so ad-free and in a premium and exclusive luxury way on your phone on an app called The Athletic.
I did know that, Joe. Yes, I have been on this podcast many times, and I've become
Okay,
aware of this information.
Shush up now. Shush up. Stop talking. And Alex, do you enjoy doing what I've just said you can do?
What? Looking at football writing on the Athletic app?
Yes.
I enjoy it as much as I enjoy anything.
Okay, well, that's marketing 101 for you. Do you know about it? Yes. Do you enjoy it? Yes. So that means everyone listening also will, and that's the rule. So if you visit theathletic.com/Tifo, you can find out if the rule applies to you, but you've got to do it first to find out. That's the game.
Cooking with the finest ingredients here, aren't you?
Anyway, I'll leave you now in the warm hands and the cool embrace of Mr. Jack Pitt-Brooke. Right, Jack Pitt-Brooke, hello.
Hey, how are you?
I'm all right. You're here to talk to me about Kieran Trippier and the betting case because it's an interesting one. I mean, we want to talk a little bit about why it's such a complex issue and some of the sort of the crossovers and the difficulties within the football industry itself. But for a start, for those people who haven't been aware of this story or haven't read the finer details, such as myself until this morning when I read your piece on The Athletic, I think it's worth doing a little précis. And so this case refers to Kieran Trippier's move to Atletico Madrid and essentially a WhatsApp group, I'm right in thinking, where he let a couple of friends know, accidentally or not, that he was going to be moving. Those friends then bet on him making that move before it was public knowledge. Can you just walk me through the story briefly so that everybody's up to date with us?
Yeah, so basically, Kieran Trippier has been banned from football for 10 weeks and fined £70,000 because of a series of WhatsApps that he sent to his friends in July 2019 when he was on the brink of moving from Tottenham to Atletico Madrid for £25 million. These were messages which indicated that he was off to Atletico and which his friends used to put money on that happening. And crucially, Trippier knew that they were going to bet, or Trippier could reasonably have known that his friends were going to bet on this transfer. Now, this is not allowed by the FA. They don't want people using their insider knowledge from football to either make money for themselves or for their friends. It's a similar case to the one brought against Daniel Sturridge. Sturridge got a longer ban and a heavier fine about 18 months ago for talking his friends through his move away from Liverpool and getting his friends to bet on various potential moves, not all of which happened. So it's a difficult issue, this, because it raises lots of questions about the crossover between football and betting, and what areas of activity and behaviour the FA should be able to investigate and punish. I'm sure we'll get into this later on. But that broadly is what's happened here.
We absolutely will get into that. I want to come to the idea of where the line is in terms of his culpability. Before we do that, I think it's worth, and of course this hasn't made a huge amount of difference to the case itself or to the punishment handed out, but I think it's worth people knowing the amount of money that was actually made from these bets that weren't supposed to be allowed. I've got the figures in front of me, or if you remember them, put it this way, it's less than £1,500 in total from 23 bets. Now, I know that doesn't make it any less wrong, but it for me, when I got to that point of your article, it felt like it put it in a slightly different context. Is that fair, or does it just not make any difference? The law's the law.
For me, the smallness of the sums of money underlines the fact that there is no scandal here. There's no conspiracy, and there is certainly no attempt, we can say this with certainty, there's no attempt even from Trippier himself to defraud people or to make money from anyone or to cheat anyone. I think that is very, very clear. Like even what Trippier has done is simply respond to questions from his mates about this. Respond honestly and probably quite naively by giving them this information. But this is not some conspiracy to defraud bookmakers at all. And the sums of money that, if it was a conspiracy to defraud bookmakers, you would think they would have made a bit more money out of it. Like I know it looks bad, this story, and lots of people, some people who got quite angry and self-righteous about it. I really don't think the offence here is particularly bad.
No, I really, my favourite bit of your article about it was the first part that references a bet at all, and it's one of the friends who, in some total by the end, had made 18 bets. The total made from that was just over £1,300. But the first bet that you reference him making was a bet of £20, and I just remember thinking that I've heard about this story a lot. I hadn't really read the finer details until this morning. I'd heard about it a lot. I'd heard about the punishment and the fine that had been handed out, and of course the conversation as it relates to the complexity of the issue. I had no idea that the numbers were so small, which has changed the way I look at it a little bit. And also you say, he hasn't really encouraged anybody to bet. But the ruling was that he could have reasonably known that was going to happen. There's only one case, I think. An additional friend asks him if he should lump on, and he says, "Well," Trippier responds saying something like, "Don't blame me if something goes wrong." But initially, he just asks a friend if he'll come to Madrid with him to sign, which made me think that really puts footballers in quite a difficult situation, doesn't it? I suppose if you don't have an immediate family, then the number of people that you can talk to about huge life decisions, I suppose, are other footballers, really.
Yeah, I think it is setting an unrealistically high bar for behaviour. Yeah. To tell Trippier or any footballer in his position that he can't discuss this move with his friends, because the fact is that lots of people who are mates with footballers bet. And that's not because they're trying to cheat money out of the system. It's because they're men in their 20s. Men in their 20s who like football like to bet. And Trippier is being told, and he's told explicitly in the document here, like towards the end of the written reasons published by the Independent Regulatory Commission, that he should have prefaced all of these conversations with his mates with, I am going to Atletico Madrid, but please don't use that information to bet. That's just incredibly unrealistic. Like nobody would preface their conversations that way. And it's only really because Trippier handed over his phone, which meant that the Commission could have a view of his WhatsApps, that there is this expectation that he would have been saying this. It's I think it sets an absurdly high bar to demand of our players that they can only discuss their futures and really big life events, leaving England to go and play in Spain, with this kind of ridiculous terms and conditions added on the end to kind of get you off the legal hook. It just seems really unfair.
I'm sympathetic to that because it reminds me of situations where I've been speaking to a friend about somebody else and I felt the urge to say, "Oh, please don't please don't mention this to anyone. But to do so would also be quite insulting because the expectation would be that they would know, enough to not say this anyway. And it puts footballers in an odd position. But anyway, let's talk about where the line is then, because as we say, he didn't encourage anybody to bet. I think it's pretty fair to suggest that he could have reasonably known that was going to happen, at least certainly in one case. Is that the line then? He does need to, or footballers in the future need to preface these messages and conversations with a request not to do so. Would that have got him out of this situation?
Yeah, so in the document produced by the Regulatory Commission, they say that Trippier should have said in his communications with his friends that they must not use that information to bet on. There does exist something called the regulatory defence, which is that if a player did not know or could not reasonably have known that the information provided would be used in terms of betting, then they can get off that way. But I think in reality, so many of these conversations are going to be with friends who are into betting. Clearly, in these instances, betting had already been discussed, never brought up by Trippier, I should say. The issue of betting was always raised by his friends, and Trippier was simply replying to questions. But because betting had been discussed, and because Trippier should have known that there would be betting, that's why Trippier is legally on the hook and why the FA feel they can punish him. Now, that's why I suppose, there is a view that Trippier has got this wrong, that Trippier's been naive, he's been careless, he should have known about the rules, he should have known from Sturridge's example. I'm sure the players will have been told about what they can and can't do, and some people have been very critical of Trippier on those grounds, saying, he's stupid, he shouldn't have done it. Well, maybe. Personally, I think that's quite unfair and, like I've said, unrealistic. And I just think that the legal burden on this case is totally stacked against the player. It demands an unrealistic standard of behaviour from the player, and I think it's wrong. I don't think that it is the right solution to the problem, and I think it only exists to punish players.
Well, I guess the last question would be in terms of the long-term future of these special markets like next manager odds or new signings. Now, we know that they exist mainly for publicity reasons, and they're a good way of bring people towards your sites, but they can be manipulated. So clearly. So, what do you think the long-term future of the special markets is?
Well, some bookmakers have stopped doing these because they're just too easily manipulable. I can totally understand why they would feel that way. They raise very obvious problems. I think fundamentally it's for the betting industry to decide, and that means it's for the betting industry to police. And this is what I think is so baffling about this, is that I do understand that there is a potential issue here. If I was a bookmaker, I wouldn't want the mates of footballers to be putting bigger sums of money than this on transfers or manager moves or things they might have inside information about. But that's an issue for the betting industry. It's not an issue where the Football Association should be trying to over-regulate the lives of its players. And in the case of Trippier and Sturridge, these are England internationals. These are people who play for the FA's flagship product, the England national team. And I don't think it's right that the FA should be coming down so hard on these guys when it's like there are so many areas of overlap between the betting industry and the football industry. Look how many Premier League teams are sponsored by ManBetX, or look how many gambling. Go to any football match and see how much gambling is pushed down your throat. And even look at the number of football owners who've made money out of gambling. And yet this is the area that the FA choose to come down hard on. It just seems to me to be, maybe it's because this is the easiest thing to regulate. Maybe it's because
and the most public, maybe.
Yeah, and it's easier to come down hard on the players than it is to kind of turn the money tap off. But I just think that is not really the right approach. Rather, it's kind of missing. It's missing the wood for the trees.
Well, maybe this is maybe I'm not on the money here, and maybe this is an indelicate way of putting it, but it does seem like the FA is doing a bit of a policing job to make the football environment more hospitable for an industry that spends an awful lot of money in it.
Yeah, I mean, it is surprising to see the football authorities take doing the work of the gambling industry at the cost of the footballers. Like, the footballers are the guys that make the football industry work, not the betting companies, and yet here we are.
Yeah. Okay. Well, hey, thanks, Jack, and hopefully we'll have you back to speak about this more in the future. I'm joking. I hope there's no more issues like this ever.
I can absolutely promise you there will be issues like this again in the future.
Okay. Well, you're our guy. Okay, well that was Jack, and now it's back to Seb, Alex and me, and we're going to start this Sensible Transfers episode by discussing Isco, as asked for by Billy Brown. Thanks, Billy Brown. Isco, did you know that Isco is 28 years old? What? Seb, what?
I know, it's crazy, isn't it? It seems
I thought
like
he was like 18 or something.
Yeah, I know. It feels like he's been stuck in that period of his career when he was at Malaga forever. And
He was going to jump up, wasn't he? And then be the best.
up. He was going to be super
Like no one ever
entertaining.
was.
Yeah, and it's never really happened. It feels, I feel a little bit sorry for him because he's like, one of the themes that keeps coming up when we talk about Real Madrid is this sort of between eras situation where you've got a group of players who won all of those European Cups and the next generation, and then sort of bang in the middle with, you know, players like Rafael Varane is Isco. And
He's
Isco,
fallen right through the era's crack. He's below the floorboards right now.
He has done, and also it's really difficult to make a case for him having a future because positionally, he doesn't seem to fit what Real wanted to do in the past, or presumably will want to do in the future. So I'm not really. And every transfer window, we begin by saying, yeah, they'll probably want to get him off the wage bill, and yet,
And you always think he'll go to Arsenal or something.
Yeah, or he will. Maybe Juventus will make a large bid for him, or somebody in Germany will take a punt, and yet he's still there, and he's nearly 30.
I wonder why. I mean, maybe he just really likes it there.
Sure. Well, who wouldn't? I mean, the status of playing for Real Madrid is something a player will desire. Also, I think the important question is, over the last sort of, let's say 5 years, how damaged has his status been by his lack of involvement? And as a result of that, where could he realistically be expected to move, which would afford him the same kind of stage that he enjoys now? Would he go at the moment to Manchester United? No, doesn't fit there. Manchester City? I don't think so. I'm not quite sure he's good enough. What about Chelsea? No, doesn't fit there. Bayern Munich? Not good enough. Arsenal are a Europa League club. I mean,
So?
Yeah.
They're also Arsenal.
Yeah, but you'd have to fund his wages. If you're Arsenal, do you want to put another person on your wage bill who's probably going to cost £200,000 a week, who's also 28? I'd say no. I think that's kind of inviting trouble.
When does his contract at Madrid end?
I do not know. That is information I certainly should have looked up before we.
I'm going to look it up now.
Okay.
Are you going to use your Joe's going to use his favourite website now, which is Transfermarkt, where he goes.
It's actually Google. Google's telling me that Isco's contract is set to run until 2022, with an option of 12 further additional months, which, you know, I suppose the club might not necessarily want to take up at the age of 30, but, you know, I guess he would want to. So theoretically, there's a year left. A year and a half left, plus one possible year. So he could be getting to the point now where he's slightly more affordable. I suppose he's 28 years old, so he's not going to want to lower his wage demand at this point, and I can understand why that would be the case. I have no idea what he's earning at Real Madrid, but also
Probably
the Daily Mail
reasonable amount.
reported in 2017 that he signed a 5-year deal with a £623 million clause. Then there's an ellipsis, so we won't finish that. Alex, Isco, tell us a bit about what kind of player he is, because Seb has alluded to the fact that he wouldn't quite fit in at many of these teams. I've always understood him to be sort of a 10, a little bit more dynamic to my eye. Tell me what you think about him.
Yeah, I mean that is what he was. It's interesting that he's not actually played over 2,000 minutes in a domestic season since 2014-15, when he was 22. He's been declining in the amount of time he's actually played ever since then. He did have that outstanding season in 2016-17 with 10 goals and 7 assists in the league, which meant that in terms of his minutes, he was doing a goal or an assist pretty much in every kind of full game he played, which is an extraordinary output. He is that kind of dynamic 10. He's a good ball carrier. He's good in tight spaces. He's very much a product of how those kind of, you know, slightly compact, diminutive Spanish playmakers were coming through at that period of time. And I'm not entirely sure why he's been used sparingly since then. Because when he played, he tended to produce relatively well. I suppose, you know, sometimes at a big club like Madrid, you can have impressive local talent or relatively local talent that gets forced out by bigger players coming in. I think also with Madrid's move to a 4-3-3, that naturally meant that Isco was being forced to play largely on the wings, cutting inside, and that wasn't really what he wanted to do. And I suppose then you have a difficulty of, you know, do you change your system because there's one player who's very good but isn't getting the minutes, or do you stick with what you've got and then just kind of accept that player is going to be on the sidelines? And that's obviously the approach that Madrid went for. I would be very concerned if I were any sort of top club looking at him just on the basis of how little he's played recently. I think it's probably more likely that he would go on maybe a loan move to another Spanish side.
It sounds like a loan move, doesn't it? I mean, that's why I was. I'll come back to ask you, Alex, about the possibility of a loan to somewhere like Arsenal. I mean, personally, I think he'd fit in quite well at Arsenal. I'm really pushing this boat.
Every creative attacking player to Arsenal, aren't we?
Well, that's purely because, you know, the way that we've discussed Arsenal recently, and what I've seen from Arsenal, you know, having watched them over the last couple of months, really. I'm just going to paraphrase what you've said in the Sensible Transfers video, which was released this week on the main channel, by the way, if anybody wants to go and take a look. Isco not mentioned. But that there seems to be some difficulty, you know, there's dynamism, you know, slightly further back in midfield in the form of Thomas Partey as an example. But actually, there's a bit of a lack of creativity in what would be the natural number 10 area. And really, one of the things that the team could benefit from is a player who can move the ball on from, you know, who can assist in the transition slightly and be a little bit more creative in those tight areas. And I wonder if, you know, a 6-month loan deal for Isco with an option for a further year is maybe not a bad thing. I mean, I guess those sorts of things all depend on the finances, don't they? So, but just from a tactical perspective, and I know it's difficult because, as you say, he hasn't played a great deal, so it's very difficult to judge him. But he could fit there, right?
He could fit there, I would suggest, but I think Arsenal are in an interesting position at the moment, particularly over the last sort of month or so. Emile Smith-Rowe has started to get proper playing time in that position. Yeah. And he's someone that we talked about back in, I think, the summer of 2019, or maybe it was last year. I don't know. Time is rather elastic at the moment, isn't it? But, you know, that position, I think Arsenal are in a situation now where they need to stick or twist with Smith-Rowe. I think he's shown enough to get consistent game time. He fits their requirements in that position. He's able to move the ball on quickly. He's a good head up player for making these dynamic passes out wide and then getting forwards into the box. And I don't know what the Arsenal fan base would say, but I think it would be an interesting political move to bring in somebody ahead of an Arsenal youth product who's starting to do enough in the first team to show that they're capable of having a position there. So a big move that would presumably have quite a high wage impact, even if it was only a loan, given Arsenal's financial situation and the fact they've got players coming through, might be quite an unpopular one, even if in a footballing sense it sort of makes sense.
Okay, well, that's Isco. Lovely hair and beard. Thank you, Alex. Moussa Diaby of Leverkusen, a young winger, 21. Place of birth, Paris. Yeah, very exciting. This is just how I think. This person was asked for by TNP, so thanks TNP. I'm not entirely sure why Moussa Diaby is on our list. Seb, is there an expectation that he is a move is imminent, or is he just an exciting young player that is likely to leave Leverkusen? Well, what we must say is a very decent Leverkusen team at some point in the future.
No, there's no suggestion that he's imminently leaving. There is always a little bit of speculation about him because he's such an interesting and exciting player. And I was scrolling down the list, and I watched Leverkusen and Diaby over the weekend, who were actually really disappointing. And it's just an interesting discussion point because and I don't know if I'm being lazy by saying this, but there is a Sadio Mane parallel. The way he plays is a little bit similar. His position is quite similar. Not in the same weight category, of course. But you could see someone like Diaby under the right coach, in the right system, evolving in that sort of direction in the future. And so it wouldn't surprise me, as with all young attacking players, if there was sort of serious interest from heavyweight clubs in the future. He just interests me. He's not. We're not trying to enrage the Leverkusen fan base by beginning transfer rumours about their important players, but he's someone that will almost certainly be on the radar of quite a few clubs.
Big portion of our fan base, Leverkusen supporters.
Massive,
so
massive.
Please, yes, please.
But please come back
listening.
in a few weeks after you've unsubscribed from our
Absolutely.
podcast.
Don't worry. We'll get to a cool name later in the list, and we'll suggest they go to Leverkusen to balance things out. What are you thinking there? Because when you say Sadio Mane, I think Liverpool, and then I can't remember any other football club. So, what exactly are you thinking in terms of a move? And presumably, are we a year or two away from that point? He still needs to develop, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think also because of the financial situation in world football at the moment, the opportunity for clubs to take a little bit of a punt on a younger player is not quite what it was. So maybe under normal circumstances, you could see someone putting up £40 million or euros for Diaby now. I think they'd want to see a little bit more before they did that. I certainly think that his pathway to a truly elite, sort of title contending side, like a Juventus, for instance, just throwing out, name at random. I think that's probably a year or two away. I think he needs to put a little bit more on tape before that happens.
Well, to add to that as well, we should say that the date of his last contract extension was December 17th, 2020, and it runs till 2025. So
exactly. So it's going to be very, very expensive.
Down.
Yeah, pretty
absolutely. Alex, what do you think of this player? Presumably you've seen him play, and I get that you would like him.
Yeah, no, he is good. I think it's worth saying that he's only 21. He's a kind of classic inverted winger. Quick bursts inside. Leverkusen with him and Leon Bailey on the other side like to have a player that sits off while Kevin Volland kind of drags defenders around, and then those two quick wingers cut inside and create the goal threat.
So fast.
And yeah, he's very fast. I agree with Seb. I mean, when he was 19, he had the season at PSG where he got 6 assists, and that was very impressive. That kind of brought him to people's attention. But obviously at PSG, the pathway for young French players isn't necessarily a smooth one. So he moved to Leverkusen. I think I'd like to see his output a little bit higher to really get him into a bracket where you can be assured that he's going to become a great player rather than a good one. There's nothing in his numbers other than the fact that he does hit his XG and his XA consistently, so he's not massively overachieving. There's not like a hot streak where you'd be worried about overperformance that'll drop off. He is consistent, but I think he needs to do more. The thing I'd say that's in his favour is that Leverkusen are a good club for giving minutes to young players. So Bailey is 22, Florian Wirtz, who's coming through, is only 17. Obviously, it's where Kai Havertz came from. Tapsoba, who's the big, tall, left-sided central defender, is getting lots of minutes at the age of 21. Leverkusen are one of these sides with a good pipeline and confidence in young players to get minutes and develop that way, because they are kind of a selling club in that regard. So it makes sense for them from a business perspective. If he improves his output, then he could be destined for a big club. He was apparently linked with Man United, but who hasn't been?
Who hasn't
true.
been at this point?
That's true.
Yeah. But at the moment, I think a move to a big club would be premature for him.
Well, yes, I hope it has too, Alex. And I'm going to go a little further to appease the Leverkusen fans, but not appease, but be excited with, because 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, I played a lot of the video game FIFA, which was an unusual thing for me to do. I don't know what I was doing. Maybe I was, fallow. Who knows? Who knows?
You got quite into that though. You that was in a really interesting stage in your kind of personal growth.
It was.
You were always trying to convince me to play it, which was
that's because I wanted to beat you.
Happen.
No, but I played with Leverkusen. Leverkusen were my chosen team to play online against the other people and their teams. And I loved the Leverkusen of about 3 years ago. I'm thinking of Bellarabi. I'm thinking of the Bender brothers. I'm thinking of Julian Brandt and Kai Havertz and Kevin Follen and Leon Bailey, of course. And Aaron Geese. And it was such a good team. I know some of those players have, of course, moved on now. But that team will always go down in history. A special place for me. So thank you to the people of... Is Leverkusen the place? Let's move on and talk about Paulo Dybala, because multiple people asked us to speak about young Paulo. Is he young anymore? I just don't know how old people are these days. But Seb, Juventus are not having a good season. Tell us a little bit about that, and also Paulo Dybala, because there've been rumours and more than rumours, reports for the last couple of windows that he's on his way. There just hasn't been anything that's been solidified.
Yeah, a really strange situation. Obviously, he came pretty close to moving to Tottenham at the beginning of last season, only for that move to break down because of failure to reach an agreement regarding his image rights. It's odd because after that move failed to materialise, there was obviously talk of a new contract, and that's reappeared periodically over the last year and a half. And it seems like every time a discussion of note is on the horizon, it gets cancelled. And so now he's in a situation where he's got maybe, I think, 14, 15 months until his contract expires. And Juventus are really in an odd place. I mean, they're having a bad season in comparison to what has been a decade of absolute dominance of Serie A. They're now, at the time that we're recording this, around 10 points off the top of the table, which for them is a disaster. To be trailing a side like AC Milan, I think they're currently in 4th place. I saw them labour past Sassuolo over the weekend, and they seem like a club very much in transition, and also populated by players who, I mean, they're good enough to play for a club like Juventus, but do they have a long-term future there? Are they the right age profile to be there? You'd say no in quite a few instances. And Dybala, and much like we were, it's not quite the same as the Isco situation, but he's almost in a category of his own. Does he fit what they're trying to do offensively? I'd say probably not, and that's not really his fault. It's not necessarily the coach's fault, Andrea Pirlo. It's more just a product of the fact that all roads lead to Cristiano Ronaldo at Juventus at the moment, and his massive contract. And so it's a kind of distorted world there. So I don't know what his future is there, and I'm nagged by the suspicion that Dybala, in my mind, Dybala belongs in a much higher category in terms of his ability. He's a brilliant footballer at his best. And yet, for as long as he's been at Juventus, there's always been something above him, if that makes sense. There's always been he's always been a kind of a supporting actor. And you just think, for the right club, he could be a star, and he should be a star with his ability, definitely.
So, I mean, I was very excited about the prospects
of
him. I was very excited about the prospects of him playing alongside Harry Kane. I thought that would have been really, really cool. Not that, it necessarily seems like it makes sense now. And in a way, I suppose I'm glad that it didn't happen because of the emergence of the Son and Kane partnership. But when we're thinking about, teams that he could feature at, Alex, of course, he's 27 years old. So theoretically, he should be entering his prime. I'm sure he hasn't played as much football as he would have liked to have done recently. Are there obvious contenders that appear in your mind?
I agree with Seb. He's definitely a class above an Isco, for example. I think the two things that I particularly like about Dybala are consistency of output. When he's played, he's pretty much always done well. He's only had 2 seasons where he's had less than 0.5 goals or assists per 90, which is very, very impressive. He hit 22 goals in one season for Juve. He's also extremely versatile. So, Allegri used him as a kind of advanced central midfielder in a sort of David Silva, De Bruyne type way. He's played as a striker. He's played as a 10. He's played as an inverted winger, cutting in to shoot with his left foot. And he's, if he's given a chance at a big team and made kind of the focal point of that side, like he was for Juve back in 2017-18, there's no reason at all why he shouldn't excel. So, yes, obviously it's difficult in attacking positions, because if you look at most of the big clubs, they've got a lot of players in attacking positions because they've already bought a lot of talent. And if you're at Juve, you're on big wages and you've got consistent opportunities for success. And that's probably why he didn't move in the first instance. As Juve transition, now's probably the right time. But I could see him... I don't know. I could see Spurs. I think still would work. I don't think Spurs necessarily have the money, but I could see him playing in a kind of an advanced role behind Kane.
I don't want to keep saying Arsenal, but
I mean, he's like, yes, he would definitely work there. I think Arsenal would be a step down for him, like a pretty significant step down, probably.
Don't you think Spurs would?
Yeah, possibly. I was just referencing that earlier point. I mean, I don't know, but he could very easily go to a Real Madrid or a PSG. I'd be interested maybe to see him at somewhere like Bayern and take a bit of the burden off Thomas Müller in that 10 position. I mean, he could probably play anywhere. I know that's an incredibly nebulous answer, but
you know where I like for not just him but also Isco, and this is going to depend on Calhanolo's future and whether they allow him to leave or whether he signs a contract. AC Milan.
Yeah.
If you think about where they're going as a football club, I don't think Dybala quite fits the profile of what they want. They'd want to go younger. But if you add him to that side, and also there's always been this historic trend of big Italian clubs buying off each other. I don't think that's quite as pronounced as it was maybe 20, 15 years ago in the kind of, the Vieri, Crespo times. But it would be interesting.
It certainly would be interesting. It's difficult, isn't it? I mean, I feel like we come up against this whenever we have these sorts of conversations about players who, are theoretically, I know it's a slightly more difficult conversation in Dybala's world, but who are theoretically at the very top of the game. There are so few options unless they want to, take a bit of a gamble. The idea that Arsenal, and I don't disagree with you, Alex, that the idea that Arsenal is a step down is absolutely accurate. But then we consider Arsenal to be, one of the world's sort of premier, at least brands, and obviously one of the bigger teams in England. I don't know if it feels like that kind of step, though, and not necessarily to that club, but also I agree to Milan would also be a nice opportunity, rather than up and to play again behind other people, somewhere where Dybala can, at 27 years old, again establish himself and show people what why we think of him the way that we do, the way that he's struggled to do so in the setup at Juventus. I think it would be that makes more sense to me.
I think another, that does make sense. I think another Italian club that would be worth looking at would be Roma. They've still got Dzeko as their main centre forward, who's now 34 and is still, consistently scoring. I think he's got 7 so far, but that Roma are building quite a nice fluid side there, and Dybala could. I mean, generally they're playing a 3-4-3. So he could fit into the left-hand side role, but he could also play as a different kind of striker and give Roma a bit more flexibility and fluidity in the way they construct attacks. But I think Seb's got a good point there about, once you're in Italy, sometimes there's horse trading between those clubs that sees players move with greater ease than maybe they would move abroad. So I think that could
with less
make
effect
sense.
on their earnings as well. That's an important factor here. Like
because of the tax.
Exactly.
thing.
So
yeah.
if you're in Italy and you're leaving to move to a club of lesser reputation than Juventus, it's a bruise to your ego, but also a pretty significant bruise to your bank account, probably. It's kind of the Christian Eriksen conundrum at the moment.
Bring it on back. That's why everyone comes to the old PL, hey?
Mm-hmm.
Where we got the money farm. We're printing the stuff, and we're painting everything green. We only have time for one more player, unfortunately, but I'm going to go to Alex to talk about Demarai Gray, because obviously Harvey Barnes is clearly ahead of him in the Leicester team, and is perhaps a more rounded player, but he clearly has value somewhere. What do you think of him?
I like Demarai Gray. I mean, he's not a significant player in terms of output. The only time he's got more than 5 goals in a season was back when he was 18 at Birmingham. And again, assists wise, not enormous, but there's a very energetic, interesting player there. I think he's a good presser. He's hardworking.
Southampton.
Exactly.
Southampton.
I think, he's still only 24. He's like you say, he's behind Barnes in the pecking order at Leicester, and that makes perfect sense because he's not as good. But I can definitely see him working on that left-hand side for Southampton. I think in terms of adapting to the energetic pressing style that Hasenhüttl has, there's no reason in my mind why that couldn't work. Obviously, Theo Walcott has done well both on that left-hand side and also standing in as a striker in Danny Ings' absence. But that is only a loan from Everton. I don't think Gray would be particularly expensive, which...
Well, he's technically a free... He's available to talk to other clubs now. He'll be a free transfer in the summer.
Then he wouldn't cost anything, which is great. I mean, obviously he would, because free transfers aren't free. We all know that. But
and there'll be a signing-on fee, maybe.
But I think he fits the profile of Southampton have looked, say, with Kyle Walker-Peters, at somebody who shows a lot of promise, but isn't necessarily going to get the opportunities at the club that they're at, and we take a chance on them and develop them, and that's something that Ralph's really strong on. And I think Demarai Gray fits that very well, and with Walcott, almost certainly, probably, I just think Walcott staying on, having that deal extended or made permanent, doesn't really make sense with Southampton's overall signing profile. De Gray is somebody I think would fit in well.
Yeah, it's a shame they can't play together though, because if they, combine to create a potent, wide attacking force down the flanks, we could call them the Grey Wall. Yeah.
I've got nothing in response to that.
Every time you say something like that, I'll always remember the time we spent in the old office, when it was the beginning of the final season of Game of Thrones, and you spent all day humming the theme tune. You were so excited. It was so sweet.
At the Grey Wall, at the Grey Wall.
It was just one of those really endearing moments, and it's just as obviously the final season. Well, as the final season became a disaster, I just felt very sorry for you because you'd been let down.
I didn't mind so much. It's okay. Everything's fine. Whatever. Maybe Ed Sheeran will turn up in my life. For a bit. And then, yeah, great. That would make sense, wouldn't it? Oh, maybe he'd just be really nice. Fuck off. Anyway, it's the end of the episode now. Thanks to everyone for listening. We do have more players to discuss. You've all been very kind and submitted suggestions. If you're keen to submit some more that you want us to look at, and sometimes I do toggle new when I'm looking at these names, so don't worry that we won't see it. You can head to the Tifo Football YouTube page, hit the community tab, scroll down a little bit. We posted it, a couple of weeks ago now, and there is a request for names. It's probably the most engaged with post on there, so it won't be difficult.
Can I have a moan about something? Can I say that if you are going to post on our community page, which you're most welcome to do, have a look at who has been requested before, so that we don't get too many duplicates, because
you don't understand how the internet works at all, do you? Imagine that. Like,
can you please scroll through 600 things before you make it?
No, it's scan. Just have a very quick scroll.
No,
it'll take
don't do
20
that.
seconds.
Mindlessly
Absolutely
engage.
do that.
What do you think I'm asking them to do? Seriously, I'm asking them to mindlessly engage. They are a number. I don't care about them, Seb. I don't care about who they are or their personage. All I want is their letters. I want their time. I want them clicking on my things. Look at you, read through 700 comments before. That's not true. By the way, just FYI, you leaving a comment on my community page, it doesn't feature in any of the stats documents I have anywhere and doesn't help me at all, other than to provide good content for the podcast and as a nice way to
don't ask
to
for
reach
Messi
out.
again. That's what I'm saying.
Hey, tell you what, if you're listening this far through, please go and leave a comment asking specifically for Messi and nobody else. That would be lovely for me, and it will be great and fun for you to wind Seb up, because
Seb's also
honestly,
available on Twitter, so you could just tweet him directly
Oh, will you fuck off?
to ask for Messi.
I'm going to do that now as we speak. Can someone else close the episode, please, while I'm
At
typing?
Seb SB.
No, seriously, Seb, just say goodbye to everyone for me, will you?
Yeah, farewell. Bye. See you in a couple of days.
Messi, please.